If you're one of the roughly 25 million Americans retiring with a public pension, you've probably already heard the news. The windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset, the two rules that used to shrink your Social Security check, are gone. Congress repealed them in January 2025, and by now thousands of retired teachers, firefighters, and postal workers have opened a letter with a number on it that looks almost too good to be true. Here's the part nobody mailed you a warning about. That retroactive check, the one covering everything you were owed back to December 2023, can push you straight into a tax bill you never planned for. Add up 24 months at an average of $360 a month, and you're looking at $8,640 landing in your account in one shot. For a retired teacher and firefighter couple, that single payment can trigger a tax bill somewhere between $4,000 and $9,000, and that money gets taken before you ever get to spend a dollar of it. I've watched people who did everything right, 30 years in a classroom or on a fire truck, treat this raise like free money. It isn't free. It's taxable income showing up all at once inside a system built to tax income arriving steadily, not in one lump. You spent 3 decades being the saver, the one who put money away and didn't touch it. Now the system is quietly asking you to become a spender at the exact moment that costs you the most in taxes. This isn't about whether you deserve the money. You do. It's about protecting what you already earned from a tax rule most retirees have never had to think about before. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the actual math on how a retroactive check like this can shove you into a higher tax bracket, and the one IRS form that can stop it from happening to you. The Social Security Fairness Act became law in January 2025, and it did something Congress rarely does. It fully repealed the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset, the two rules that had reduced Social Security checks for public employees who also collect a pension. For anyone affected, the average increase runs around $360 a month. Because the repeal covers benefits going back to December 2023, the Social Security Administration has been sending out retroactive checks that can stretch back nearly 2 years. That's where the trap hides. Social Security benefits aren't taxed the way your paycheck was taxed. They get taxed based on something called combined income, which is your adjusted gross income plus any tax-exempt interest, plus half of your Social Security benefit for the year. A retroactive lump sum doesn't just get taxed at your regular rate. It can push your combined income high enough that a bigger slice of your regular, ongoing Social Security check becomes taxable too. Picture a retired couple pulling in $60,000 a year from a pension and $30,000 a year from Social Security. On its own, that mix might keep them under the threshold where most of their Social Security stays untaxed. Now add a $9,000 retroactive check on top. That single payment can carry their combined income past $44,000, the point where up to 85% of their Social Security becomes taxable. One check, arriving because the government finally corrected an old mistake, can quietly cost them more in taxes than they expected for the entire year. There's one line of defense worth knowing before your check arrives. You can file Form W-4V with the Social Security Administration and ask them to withhold a flat percentage of your benefit for taxes, including that retroactive payment, before it ever hits your bank account. It won't erase the tax bill, but it stops a surprise the following April from turning into a scramble for cash you already spent. None of this means you did anything wrong. You aren't being greedy for taking money you were always owed. you're running into a tax code that was written decades ago and never updated for a repeal like this one. The trade-off nobody spells out is simple. Getting paid back correctly, all in one check, can end up costing you more in taxes than if that same money had just been paid to you a little at a time, the way it should have been from the start. If you're a public servant who's tired of watching the rules shift under your feet after 30 years of service, subscribe to this channel. We spend our time on the hidden math that protects the money you already earned, not the headlines everyone else is repeating. But the tax bomb isn't the only surprise waiting for you. If you think your pension check itself is guaranteed just because it comes from a government contract, there's a number you need to see first. It's called the 65% rule, and it might change how safe you actually feel. Most people assume a pension is simply safe. You work the job, you earn the promise, and a check shows up every month for the rest of your life. For most retirees, that holds true. But pension plans get graded on something called a funded ratio, which is just how much money the plan actually has set aside compared to what it owes everyone who's owed a check, now and in the future. Under actuarial standards, a plan funded below 65% is considered to be in critical status. You can check this yourself. Every pension plan sends out something called an annual funding. Notice, usually once a year, and it lists the funded percentage right on the page. Most people never open it. If your plan shows a number close to or under 65%, it doesn't mean your check stops. It means the plan has less room to absorb a bad decade in the markets or a shortfall in the state budget without making changes somewhere. Here's where it actually bites people who assumed they were fully protected. A struggling plan rarely cuts the check you're already receiving. What it does instead is freeze the cost of living adjustment, the annual bump meant to keep your check in line with rising prices. In a year where inflation runs at 2.8%, a frozen cost of living adjustment isn't neutral. It's a 2.8% pay cut in real terms. Every single year it stays frozen, on a check you already built your whole budget around. A plan sitting at 90% funded and a plan sitting at 55% funded can mail you the exact same check this year. The difference only shows up later, after a bad stretch in the markets or a shortfall in state tax revenue, and by then the usual response is to protect the base benefit at the cost of the increase stacked on top of it. That's why the cost of living adjustment is where the pain shows up first, quietly, long before anyone touches the check itself. I used to tell people their state pension was about as close to bulletproof as money gets. Then I started looking at municipal bond defaults and funding notices coming out of a few state systems, and I changed my mind. A guarantee is only as strong as the tax base standing behind it. That doesn't mean panic. It means look at the actual number in your own funding notice instead of assuming. If your pension has no cost of living adjustment at all, or one that's capped low, you're effectively retiring into a paycheck that shrinks every year, even while the number on the check stays exactly the same. There's a way to build a buffer against that, using an account most public employees already have and rarely use correctly. It's called a 457B, and it works differently than you'd think. Most public employees have access to a 457B plan sitting right next to their pension, and most never touch the one feature that makes it different from a 401k. With a 401k, pulling money out before age 59 and a half usually costs you a 10% penalty. A 457B doesn't work that way. Once you separate from your job, you can pull money out at any age, no penalty at all, regardless of how old you are. That single difference makes the 457B the natural bridge between the day you retire and the day you turn 67, which is full retirement age for anyone born in 1960 or later. In 2026, you can put away $24,500 into a 457B, and if you're between 60 and 63, an extra $11,250 on top of that as a super catch-up contribution. For someone retiring in their early 60s, with a pension already covering the basics, that account can be the difference between taking Social Security early out of necessity or waiting because you can actually afford to. Here's the mechanism that makes waiting worth real money. Every year you delay claiming Social Security past 62, up to age 70, your future monthly check grows by roughly 8%. Draw from your 457B instead of starting Social Security at 62, and you're not just avoiding a penalty. You're letting your future check compound at a rate almost no investment can guarantee you. Say your pension plus 457B withdrawals comfortably cover your living expenses. Stretch that account across 4 years instead of 2, and you can push your Social Security claim from 62 to 66, banking roughly 4 years of 8% growth stacked on top of your base benefit, growth no bond or annuity you buy on your own can match risk-free. This only works if the money's already sitting there when you need it, which means the decision gets made years before retirement, not the week after. But there's something standing in the way of most people who could actually pull this off, and it has nothing to do with math. It's a kind of guilt that shows up the moment you stop contributing and start withdrawing, and it quietly convinces disciplined savers to leave money on the table they'll never get to spend. For 30 years, watching money leave your paycheck into a retirement account felt like doing the right thing. Every contribution was proof you were being responsible. Then retirement arrives, and suddenly that same account requires you to take money out instead of put it in. And for a lot of people, that withdrawal feels less like a reward and more like a mistake. It makes complete sense that it feels that way. You spent 3 decades being praised, at least internally, for not touching the money. Nobody trained you for the next chapter, the one where spending it is actually the entire point. The habit that made you financially secure is the same habit now making it hard to enjoy what you built. There's a simple way to make the switch feel less like a risk. Some people call it a permission bucket. Take 1 year's worth of the money you'd actually enjoy spending, travel, grandkids, hobbies, and move it into its own separate account, away from your main savings. Once it sits there, separated from everything else, your brain starts treating it as already spent instead of something you still have to protect. I saw a retired teacher not long ago agonizing over whether to spend $200 on a flight to see her grandkids, despite bringing in $4,000 a month from her pension alone. That isn't frugality. That's a habit that outlived its usefulness, and it's worth naming honestly instead of quietly carrying it into another 20 years of retirement. None of this means you were reckless to save so hard for so long. The same instinct that built your pension in the first place is still standing guard over the money now, still doing its job. It just needs a new set of instructions. You didn't spend 30 years saving so you could feel guilty about a plane ticket. The goal was never the balance sitting in the account. It was always the life that balance was supposed to pay for, and that life is allowed to include a $200 flight without a second thought. At some point, you'll sit across from someone in your pension office and choose how your check gets paid out for the rest of your life. Most plans give you 2 main paths. Single life pays you the highest amount every month, but the check stops the day you die. The 100% survivor option pays you less every month, but your spouse keeps receiving the full amount if you pass away first. Here's the stress test. Most people never run before signing anything. Take single life for the extra $800 a month, and if you pass away first, your spouse's pension check drops to zero. Their Social Security income can also fall by close to half, since a surviving spouse generally receives the higher of the two benefits, not both combined. Meanwhile, their monthly costs barely move. Medicare Part B alone runs $202.90 a month in 2026 for most people, and that premium doesn't care whether one spouse or two are splitting the bill. There's a way to take the extra money now and still protect your spouse later. It's sometimes called pension maximization. You choose single life for the higher monthly check, then use part of that extra money to fund a permanent life insurance policy that pays your spouse a tax-free benefit if you die first. Done correctly, your spouse ends up with a lump sum that can replace the pension income they would have lost, instead of losing both the check and the safety net at the same time. Run the actual numbers before assuming single life is obviously the smarter pick. That extra $800 a month adds up to $192,000 over a 20-year retirement. A permanent policy large enough to replace your spouse's lost pension income often costs a fraction of that in premiums over the same stretch, which means the math frequently favors keeping your spouse protected without giving up as much of the upside as it first appears. This decision doesn't come with a do-over. Once you sign the election form at your pension office, it's locked in for the rest of both of your lives. It deserves more thought than a single meeting squeezed into your last week of work, not a signature you rush through on your way out the door. Let's bring everything together now and talk about what actually keeps 30 years of hard work from turning into 30 years of worry. Here's what we've covered. The repeal of the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset is genuinely good news, but the retroactive check behind it can quietly push your combined income into a bracket where more of your Social Security gets taxed. Your pension isn't automatically bulletproof either, and the number to actually check is the funded percentage sitting in your annual funding. Notice, because a frozen cost of living adjustment can shrink your buying power every year even while your check stays the same, and a 457B, used the right way, can bridge the gap between retirement and full retirement age without a penalty, buying your future Social Security check room to grow. None of this is about becoming an expert overnight. Retiring with a pension was never really about the size of the check. It's about the choices that check gives you, the ability to walk away from work on your own terms, to decide when to claim Social Security instead of being forced into it, and to protect the people who depend on you without giving up your own security along the way. That's what real resilience looks like at this stage of life. Not one big decision done perfectly, but a handful of smaller decisions made with your eyes open. If you only act on one thing after this, let it be whichever piece already applies to you. Maybe that's checking your annual funding notice, instead of assuming your plan is fine. Maybe it's asking whether your 457B has enough saved to cover a few years before you claim Social Security. Maybe it's simply refusing to sign a survivor election form the same day someone hands it to you. You spent 30 years showing up and doing the job well. That effort deserves to turn into 30 years of freedom, not 30 years of quietly wondering whether you missed something. If that's what you're after, subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly that. People who worked in public service and want their retirement to actually reflect the work they put into earning it. You've already done the hard part. You put in the years, you earned the pension, and you're still paying attention, which is more than most people ever do. Now it's just about doing the smart math to match the effort you already put in, one clear decision at a time instead of all at once.